Hello, my name's Paige, and my sister watched me bleed, stood right there, arms crossed, while her husband kept swinging at me. Not out of fear, not by mistake, because I said no. To signing a loan. That's all it took to turn family into witnesses, silence into betrayal. They told me I was dramatic, said I was ruining everything. But I wasn't the one forging signatures. I wasn't the one parking outside someone's apartment at night. They called it a dream. I called it survival. So tell me, how far would your own blood go when you stop saying yes? And if they came for your peace, would anyone believe you? The drive home from base was quiet. No podcasts, no music, just the low hum of my tires against the asphalt and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windshield. I liked that kind of silence. It gave my mind space to settle, to sort the static that built up after long days. I pulled into my apartment complex just as the sun dipped beneath the tree line, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Fall in Austin had a strange rhythm, mornings brisk enough for a jacket, evenings warm enough to forget it at home. My bones felt it, though, especially my shoulder, the one I'd torn during a medevac drill years ago. It flared up every October like clockwork. Inside, I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, kicked off my boots, and stood still for a moment. Just breathing. The quiet was mine. The space was mine. No sandstorms. No thudding rotor blades. No one needing blood types or morphine or a steady hand. Just me, four walls, and the kind of peace I never quite trusted, but always craved. I changed into an old army tee, tied my hair back, and started prepping dinner. Grilled chicken, steamed broccoli, jasmine rice. Simple, balanced, predictable, like everything I'd built in the years since coming home. The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it was firm. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the peephole and felt my gut tighten. Isolde, and behind her, Dexter. I opened the door with a practiced calm. "Hey," I said, stepping aside. Isolde smiled wide, holding up a bottle of Cabernet like it was a peace treaty. "We were in the neighborhood. Thought we'd surprise you." That was her line. Always in the neighborhood. Always just dropping by, like this wasn't a city with 500,000 people and 20 miles of traffic between our lives. Dexter gave me his version of polite. Chin lifted, eyes scanning. "Place looks nice," he said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. I nodded, closed the door, and led them to the kitchen. Isolde set the wine down on the counter like it belonged there, already talking about some new boutique she'd visited, some yoga retreat she wanted to try. Her voice was sugar-laced, but I felt the strain behind it. Like she was performing for someone, maybe even herself. I poured wine for them and water for myself, sat across from them at the small dining table, letting them settle in. Isolde reached into her purse and pulled out a thick brochure, glossy, heavy stock. "We've found something," she said, sliding it toward me. "It's incredible." I flipped it open. A 100-acre ranch just outside Fredericksburg. White fences, rolling hills, a renovated barn turned wedding venue. It looked like something from a Hallmark movie. "We've been dreaming about this," she said, fingers tapping the photo of the main house. "It's our legacy. We could build something real here. And with your name on the loan application, the bank would approve it in a heartbeat." I blinked. "Wait, you want me to sign as a guarantor?" Dexter leaned forward. "Not just that. You'd be part of it. We'd all benefit." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice level. "That's a $1.2 million mortgage." Isolde smiled wider. "But with your record, your credit score, your career, it's just paperwork. We'll handle the rest." I stared at them. I thought about the years I'd spent scraping myself together, building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. And now they were here, turning that independence into a bargaining chip. "I appreciate the idea," I said carefully. "But that's a big commitment. I need to think about it." Dexter's jaw twitched. "It's not like we're asking you to pay it off. Just back us up." Isolde's smile flickered, just a crack. She placed her wine glass down, harder than necessary. The sound echoed. A shift. Small, but unmistakable. The conversation stumbled after that. We talked about nothing for another 10 minutes. Weather, Austin traffic, an old friend from high school, but the air had gone stale. Isolda's voice had lost its lilt. Dexter was glued to his phone. They left without finishing their drinks. I didn't walk them out. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the glasses. The brochure sat on the table, its glossy cover now spotted with condensation from the wine. I dried my hands, picked it up, and stared at the numbers again. 1.2 million. Paige Voss. U.S. Army. Reliable. Steady. The sister who always said yes. But not this time. As I rinsed the glasses they left behind, I realized they hadn't come to visit. They'd come to collect. I wiped the counter slowly, letting the residue from their wine glasses evaporate with the rest of my nerves. The room still held their scent, a blend of overly sweet perfume and some cologne that always struck me as trying too hard. I stood for a while, staring out my kitchen window, watching nothing in particular. The brochure was still on the table, untouched since I set it down hours ago. I didn't need to open it again. The images were already imprinted, not just on the page, but in the back of my mind. It was Wednesday. Midweek always brought a heavier pace at the base, and the distraction was a small relief. I'd been reviewing simulation results from New Medics, their reports scattered across my desk like a controlled mess, my preferred kind. I was highlighting a section on field tourniquet procedures when my phone buzzed. I reached for it without much thought, expecting a logistics update. It was from Isolda. No message, just a photo. The image was familiar. 2 little girls in oversized military jackets, one with her cap turned backward, the other missing a front tooth. We were leaning against our dad's old Jeep, grinning like the world would never touch us. Underneath, the caption read, "Guess we're not teammates anymore." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. I just sat there, the phone in my hand, heart somewhere between a skip and a stall. I hadn't seen that picture in over 20 years. We used to keep it on the fridge when Dad was stationed in Fort Benning. It had always made me feel safe, until now. Now it felt like a warning shot. She knew exactly what she was doing. That message wasn't nostalgia. It was guilt, wrapped in a memory we both used to treasure, and that hurt more than I expected. I set the phone face down and returned to the reports, but the page blurred. I was reading words I knew by heart, but couldn't recall the meaning. 2 days passed. I stayed busy, filled my hours with instruction drills and paperwork. When I got home Friday evening, I found a box at my door. No label, no note at first glance. Inside was a handbag. Designer. Not just expensive, obscene. The kind you see influencers show off in filtered lighting with captions about self-love and success. Tucked inside the purse's zipper was a small folded card. "For the sister who always carries us. Now let us carry you." I held that card like it might burn me. The words, clever, calculated. There was no love in them, just leverage. I placed the bag on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. Isolda didn't do gestures without angles. She'd never had that kind of warmth in her. Every kindness was an investment. Every compliment, a setup. The next morning, I texted Camber. We hadn't caught up in weeks. Too long. She replied almost immediately, told me to meet her at our usual coffee spot. It was a small place on the east side, the kind where regulars never needed to give their names, and the servers remembered how you took your coffee after the second visit. I liked it because no one cared who I was there, just a woman with a caffeine habit and a lot on her mind. Camber slid into the booth across from me, sunglasses perched on her head, phone already silenced. She took one look at me and said, "Let me guess. Isolda's playing the sentiment card." I raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know?" "She did it to her ex-husband before the divorce papers landed," she replied, shaking a sugar packet. "Memory bombs and expensive distractions. Classic Isolda." I told her about the photo, then the handbag. She listened carefully, sipping her coffee with that narrowed expression she got when she was putting pieces together. "She's not giving you a gift," she said finally. "She's buying a receipt." I let that sit for a beat. Part of me wants to believe it's not that deep, that she's just trying. Camber didn't flinch. "Trying what, exactly?" To remind you of when you didn't know better? To make you feel like you owe her something because she showed up in your life again? I don't want this to blow up, I admitted. I just want peace. That's the thing about people like your sister, Camber said, leaning back. They don't want peace. They want position. And when you stop playing along, they call you selfish. The words stung because they were true, and deep down, I had known that for a while. That night, I sat in bed with the lights off, scrolling mindlessly through messages. Nothing new. Just the usual work updates and a group thread with a few old army buddies who mostly shared dog memes and weekend plans. Then, at 11:42 p.m., another message came through from Isolde. Another photo. This time it was me in uniform, standing proudly at my commissioning ceremony, shaking hands with our commanding officer. Isolde had her arm looped through mine, her smile beaming. I remembered that day vividly. I'd worked years to get there. She'd flown in that morning, left before the reception even started. The caption this time: I was there for your big day, but I guess dreams only go one way. No greeting, no follow-up, just that. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed out 3 different replies, deleted each one. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be used against me later. That was the trick with people like her. They collected your words, your silence, your history, and turned them into weapons when the time was right. I turned the phone off, placed it on the nightstand face down, and lay back in the dark. What she didn't know is that her memories weren't the only ones I kept, and not all of them were sweet. I hadn't seen that handwriting in years, but it stopped me cold the second I spotted it. The same slant in the loops, the way the letters curled too neatly at the end of each line. It was Isolde's. She used to write our grocery lists like she was penning a wedding invitation. Perfect cursive, flourished loops, even if it was just for eggs and milk. I stared at the note. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign. No name. No explanation. No direct threat. Just that kind of message designed to sit under your skin and burrow into your nerves. I held the paper for another minute before folding it, slipping it between 2 folders in my kitchen drawer labeled Utilities and Tax Receipts. I couldn't sleep that night. I laid on my back, staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the window blinds cutting across the walls like bars. My shoulder ached, a familiar pain that came and went, like a whisper from the past. I reached up to rub it, and my fingers brushed the scar beneath the skin. That old wound hadn't acted up in a while. That's when it came flooding back. I was 19, home from college for spring break. Isolde and I were supposed to be cleaning out the guest room for our cousin, who was visiting from El Paso. I had $20 to my name, had been living off instant ramen and dollar tacos for weeks. Isolde asked if she could borrow the last of it. I told her no. I needed it for gas to get back to school. She didn't yell. She didn't slam a door. She just waited until I turned to walk down the stairs, then shoved me, hard. 3 steps. That's all it took. My foot slipped, my elbow cracked against the railing, and I landed with my back against the tile, breath knocked clean out of me. I didn't cry right away. I remember that clearly. I just laid there, stunned, and watched her look down at me, face completely blank. Later, at the hospital, I told the nurse I'd fallen in the shower. My mom whispered on the drive home, "Let it go, Paige. Sisters fight. Don't make it worse." So I let it go, like I let everything go. Until now. The following morning, I pulled myself out of bed early and walked the perimeter of my apartment building. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Tracks, evidence, a sign, but it wasn't hard to spot. A black pickup parked across the street from my unit, engine off, windows tinted. No one inside, not for the first time, and not by coincidence. I snapped a photo, noting the license plate and timestamp, then another from a different angle. A chill crept over me, but I pushed it down. Back in Kandahar, I'd learned how to notice patterns. How silence, when it came in the wrong places, meant everything. This silence was the same. I walked back inside, locked the door behind me, and pulled out the small box from under my bed. Inside were a handful of tools, my digital recorder, a motion detector light, and a small security camera I'd used in a past rental. It didn't stream to the cloud, but it recorded everything to an SD card. I installed it near my mailbox, angled just enough to capture the sidewalk, street, and the front of my building. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted proof. There's a difference. The next few days passed in a kind of fog. At work, I kept my voice steady while teaching, but I was off. One of my cadets asked if I was okay during a training debrief. I told him I was just tired. He nodded and didn't ask again, but I knew he saw it, the extra edge in my tone, the way I double-checked the exits more often than usual. Back at home, I began keeping a small notebook. Nothing dramatic, just notes, times, details. Truck was back at 8:14 p.m., left by 9:06. Headlights didn't turn on until it pulled out. No driver visible. On Thursday, I took a longer route home from base, drove past my own street twice before looping back in, just to see if I was being followed. I wasn't, but the truck was already there, parked in the same spot. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I moved through the apartment in the dark, lit only by the flicker of the television. I wasn't afraid, not really, just waiting, like I had been before so many raids overseas, the sense that something was coming, the certainty that no one was going to stop it but me. Around midnight, I stepped out onto the balcony with a mug of tea. I kept the lights off so I wouldn't be a silhouette. While, across the street, the truck idled for another 10 minutes before driving off. No headlights again. When I came back inside, I found another note. This one wasn't in the mailbox or taped to the door. It was slid underneath it, deliberate, precise. Same handwriting. You've got until Sunday, family or no family. No signature, just that. But now it wasn't a suggestion, it was a deadline. The next morning, I forwarded the license plate and photos to Camber with no context, just, "Can you run this?" She called an hour later. "That's Dexter's old truck. He sold it after the wedding, or claimed to. Registration's still in his name." I thanked her, promised I'd keep her updated, and hung up. That evening, I locked every window, bolted every door. I'd done it 1,000 times before, overseas, on base, in transit. But this was different. This was personal. This wasn't the kind of threat you could disarm with a weapon or neutralize with a tactic. This was closer, quieter, more dangerous. It was family. Sunday came like a slow drum roll, steady and inevitable. I didn't want to go to dinner, but saying no would have meant feeding their narrative, that I was pulling away, that I was acting better than everyone else, that I was too military to be family. So I baked a casserole, my mother's favorite, sausage and sweet potato, the one I always made when we were pretending to be close. The sun was dipping low as I pulled into her driveway. The sky had that peach blue haze Texas evenings are known for, and from the street, everything looked peaceful. The porch light was already on. The scent of fried okra wafted faintly through the air as I stepped up the path, familiar, almost comforting, until I opened the door. The house buzzed with voices and clinking silverware, laughter here and there, people talking over each other. I spotted my Uncle Gordon near the living room, holding a beer, mid-story about something that happened at his auto shop. My mother waved from the kitchen without breaking stride, calling out, "Just set the casserole on the counter, hun." I did. Then I stepped into the dining room and felt it. Everyone was already seated. A spot had been left for me at the end of the table, furthest from the head. I nodded, gave a small smile. Nobody said a word, no greeting, no "Hey Paige," no eye contact. I took my seat. Conversations picked up again, like I hadn't walked in at all. They weren't ignoring me outright. It was worse than that. They were talking around me, like I was furniture. I passed the cornbread without being asked, poured water in silence, listened as my cousin joked about someone's bad haircut. I tried to catch my mother's eyes once, just once. She didn't look up from her glass of iced tea. Then came the moment I should have seen coming. My uncle leaned over his plate, fork dangling in hand. "In this family, we always show up for each other," he said with a grin, looking right past me. "Right, Paige?" Someone chuckled. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. My mother didn't flinch, didn't blink, just sipped her tea. The thing about these dinners, they don't blow up, they bleed out, in little cuts. In the way they use silence to shame, in jokes that aren't jokes, in stares that say more than words ever could. I set my spoon down. I need to go, I said softly, rising from the table. And that's when my mother finally spoke. Not with concern, not even curiosity, just a sigh and a question sharpened with judgment. Do you always have to take everything so personally? I looked around the table. Not one person met my gaze. My hands were steady as I picked up my purse. The casserole sat untouched on the counter. I didn't bother wrapping it. As I stepped into the hallway, footsteps followed, heels clicking with purpose. I didn't have to look back to know it was her. Isolde. She waited until we were alone, right there in the narrow entryway, just out of view of the rest. Her tone was casual, polished, too smooth to be anything but rehearsed. "You won't do anything," she said. "You never do." That line. I'd heard it before. Not just in words, but in tone, in glances, in every moment she'd pushed me around growing up, when she'd shoved me down the stairs, when she'd told people I was too rigid to understand fun. When she'd watched me cry and asked flatly, "Are you done yet?" Back then, she was right. I never did anything. I let it slide. I kept peace. I told myself family came first. But this time, something in me shifted. Not rage, not fear, just certainty. I met her gaze, said nothing, held it long enough for her to look away first. Then I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me without a word. The night air hit like a slap. I got into my car, sat still for a moment, and let the engine hum beneath my hands. I didn't turn the radio on, just drove, letting the rhythm of the tires fill the silence. Halfway down the highway, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Isolde. "Family means sometimes doing things you don't want to do." I didn't read the rest. I deleted it. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sky was full dark. My security light flickered as I parked. I grabbed the tote bag from the back seat, the one I kept all the documents in, and carried it inside. I set the bag on the dining table, made myself a cup of tea, sat down with the property brochure she'd handed me days ago. I flipped it open. The ranch, the pasture, the white fences. I circled the address with a red pen, not to highlight it, but to mark it like a target. Then, in the margin, I wrote, "This isn't my dream. It never was." I slid the paper into a manila folder, labeled it, "Evidence. In case." Not for drama, not for revenge, for protection. They said I never do anything. This time, I did something they didn't see coming. I woke up to thunder rolling low in the distance, the kind of sound that lingered, thick and stretched, like the sky itself was warning me. Rain hadn't started yet, but the air outside my apartment was heavy with the smell of it. It was the middle of the week, and I should have been thinking about the training modules I had to finalize for Friday's medic refresher, but my mind was stuck on one thing: the folder sitting on my kitchen table and the note I'd slid into it 2 nights ago. I had told myself I was done. That writing those words, "This isn't my dream," was the end of it. But endings don't always stay endings, especially not in families like mine, where silence is currency and loyalty is a weapon. I texted Camber and asked if she had a window that afternoon. She replied instantly, 2:30, Legal Aid Office, bring everything. By noon, I'd gathered every document I had. The property brochure, the printout of the email Isolde had sent titled Joint Opportunity, the photo of the black truck with Dexter's plates, the note with her handwriting, every little piece that had made my skin crawl over the past 3 weeks. I tucked them all into the folder marked Evidence, in case, and zipped it into my work tote. Before I left, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, pulled my hair into a low bun, and looked myself straight in the eye. I'd faced gunfire in places where help was a 40-minute helicopter ride away. I'd held lives in my hands. I wasn't about to back down from a woman who thought manipulation passed for love. By the time I arrived, the rain had started in sheets, tapping hard against the windshield as I parked. I ran inside, damp but not drenched, and found Camber waiting at the back table, already flipping through her tablet. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. "You brought the war bag. Good." I pulled out the folder and set it down. You might want coffee first. 10 minutes later, she had gone through half of it. When she reached the forged loan application, she stilled. Paige, this is felony territory. I nodded once, jaw clenched. I didn't sign it. And they submitted it under your name? Yes. I got a courtesy notification from the bank this morning. Said they were pre-processing because my co-borrowers had confirmed the first stage of paperwork. I never saw the original. Only this copy. She held up the page. This signature, it's close, but it's not yours. I haven't signed anything for her since 2011, I said, voice flat. Camber sat back in her chair and folded her arms. They're escalating. I told you they would. I stared at her, not blinking. So what's next? We open a case file. We start documenting everything officially, and we protect your finances immediately. You need to alert the bank, freeze co-signing permissions, and file a fraud report. I exhaled, slow and steady. My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Camber pulled out a new folder and began labeling tabs. You've been trained to patch wounds, Paige. I get that. But it's time to stop letting them make new ones. This isn't just messy, it's criminal. As I sat across from her, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit. I'd always assumed that if this ever got ugly, my role was to manage the fallout, to absorb it until things settled. But this wasn't about keeping peace anymore. It was about refusing to be collateral damage. Back home, I placed the new folder beside the old one on my desk. 2 volumes now. Truth, backed by proof. My phone buzzed on the counter. Voicemail. I played it on speaker as I sorted documents. Hey, it's me. Isolde's voice was soft, overly sweet, her Sunday brunch tone. I just don't get why you're making this so hard. We're trying to build something, and you always used to just go along with things. I mean, come on, Paige. You've always been the reliable one. Don't ruin that. I stopped what I was doing and hit delete. No saving this one. No more folders for family guilt. That evening, I lit a candle in the living room, not for ambiance, but for focus. My therapist once told me fire helped some people process anger in a way nothing else could. I wasn't trying to be symbolic. I just needed something to steady my breathing. I opened my notebook, the one labeled Safety and Strategy, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, Silence doesn't mean agreement. Then, I will no longer let family weaponize memory. I will not be guilted into jeopardizing my career, housing, or financial security. I will not excuse behavior because it's wrapped in bloodlines. I will protect my peace like I protect my rank. I am allowed to say no, without apology, without explanation. Somewhere in the building, thunder cracked and the power flickered, then returned. I kept writing. At the bottom of the page, I penned one final line. The next time they cross the line, I won't stand there bleeding. I folded the page once, slid it into the front of the binder. Then I closed it gently, laid my hand on top, and let the weight of it ground me. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't moving it for anyone. I drew my line, and of course, they trampled it. The sound of my own voice echoed faintly in my ears. I won't stand there bleeding. But that night, I'd come to learn how quickly promises could be tested. It was Friday evening, and the apartment felt unusually quiet, like the stillness before a thunderclap. The rain had started earlier, soft and slow, tapping against the windows like an anxious visitor. I moved through my nightly routine deliberately, grounding myself in the familiar tea kettle on, laptop open, locks checked, twice. I was reviewing my folder one more time, adding a few sticky notes to timelines and cross-referencing voicemail timestamps, when my phone buzzed on the table. No contact name, just a local number I didn't recognize. I answered on instinct. There was a pause, then a man's voice, low and thick with arrogance. You'll want to open the door when we come. Don't make this ugly. Click. I stared at the phone in my hand, heart kicking against my ribs like it wanted out. The line had gone dead. No message, no follow-up. Just that. I stood there in the kitchen, teacup still warm in my other hand, steam curling past my face. I set it down slowly, walked over to the window, and peeked through the blinds. There it was. That black truck again, Same spot across the street. Headlights off. Engine running. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I grabbed my phone, dialed Camber. It rang 3 times, then voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I activated the emergency alert code we'd set up together, a message pre-written to send to both her and base security. It read, "Code red. Home. Immediate." Then I backed away from the window. The first knock wasn't a knock. It was a hit. Heavy, full-bodied, a shoulder or boot slamming into wood. My front door groaned on its hinges, then another, louder. I grabbed the landline, dialed the base MP dispatch, but before the first ring could finish, the doorframe cracked. He was inside. Dexter's frame filled the space like a shadow turned solid. His eyes were wild, glossy with whatever he'd been drinking, face flushed red beneath a week's worth of unshaven stubble. The collar of his shirt was damp. Rain or sweat, I didn't care. He reeked of whiskey and power. "Where's the damn paperwork?" he growled, voice slurred but clear enough to make my stomach clench. I tried to step back, but he was faster. His hand slammed into my chest, shoving me against the wall. My shoulder, already worn from combat gear and weight, hit the frame so hard I heard something pop. Pain bloomed immediately, hot, radiating. I gasped, more in shock than sound. Before I could regain footing, he was on me again, gripping my wrist, dragging me toward the center of the living room. That's when I saw her. Isolde, standing just inside the broken door. Arms folded, rain dripping from her hair, down her cheek, and still, not a single shred of panic. She watched like she was supervising a contractor fixing her roof. "Isolde," I rasped. "Call someone. Do something." She tilted her head slightly, and with the same cold cadence she'd used since we were kids, she said, "You should have signed." My vision blurred, not from tears, from fury. I twisted out of Dexter's grip, lunged for the lamp on the side table, and swung. The base cracked against his forearm. He cursed, grabbed me by the waist, and slammed me down onto the hardwood. My ribs took the brunt. I heard the thud of bone against wood. The impact rattled my teeth. He straddled me, yelling something about betrayal, about family, about how "you made us do this." I reached blindly, hand connecting with my phone, still on the floor from earlier. I didn't have time to unlock it, but I didn't need to. My other hand found the emergency button, part of my personal security system issued by base protocol for high-risk officers. I pressed it twice. A silent beacon went off, alerting base MPs with my coordinates and status. Dexter didn't notice. He was too busy tearing the file folder open, papers scattering like leaves in the wind. Evidence fluttered across the floor. Pages I'd spent weeks organizing. My blood was on some of them now. "You picked the wrong soldier," I whispered, voice cracked, barely audible. He paused. Not in fear. He didn't believe I had backup. Just long enough for me to crawl out from under him, dragging my injured leg. I reached for the hallway. The panic button had done its job, but I needed to survive until help arrived. He lunged after me again, but this time I was ready. I kicked back with everything I had. My boot caught him square in the shin. He fell sideways, knocking over the coat rack. Sirens, faint but growing louder. Dexter froze. Isolde took a step back. "They're coming," I said, not to him, but to myself. He pulled her by the arm, yanked her toward the door. They slipped out into the rain like ghosts abandoning a failed haunt. The door hung crooked, barely clinging to the frame. I staggered to my feet, blood warm against my temple, breath coming in shudders. My vision danced at the edges, but I forced myself toward the folder, what remained of it, and clutched it to my chest. Then I made it to the porch. Headlights flashed in the mist. 2 military police vehicles pulled up fast, tires hissing against wet pavement. One of the officers jumped out before the car fully stopped, radio in one hand, eyes locked on me. I raised a trembling hand to salute. "Captain Voss?" he called out, already moving toward me. "Yes," I croaked. "They were here." I handed him the bloodied folder. He took it like it held a detonator, nodding toward his partner. "We've got a situation," he said into his mic. and it's going federal. The courtroom didn't scare me. I'd been in places where rockets fell without warning, where medics had to work by flashlight and adrenaline. But betrayal in daylight, betrayal in the presence of the law, the truth, and the people who were supposed to protect you, that cut differently, more surgically. It was early Tuesday morning when Camber picked me up. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the streets of downtown Austin were still wet from overnight rain. I clutched the manila folder on my lap like it held the oxygen I needed to breathe. Exhibit A, home security footage, was clipped to the top of the stack, followed by hospital records, photo evidence, voicemails, and the transcript of the 911 call placed by base MPs. Camber didn't talk much on the drive. She didn't have to. Her presence was steady, like a metronome keeping time for a heart that wanted to race. When we arrived at the federal courthouse, I paused on the steps, looked up, took a deep breath. This wasn't war, but it was a battlefield, just a different kind. Inside, the hearing room was sterile and quiet, pale wood benches, a clean, polished floor. It smelled like old carpet and printed paper. The only noise was the shuffle of files, the occasional cough, and the clicking of legal shoes against tile. The judge hadn't entered yet. I scanned the room and saw them, Dexter and Isolde, sitting 2 rows ahead. He wore a pressed suit, his hair neatly combed, a flag pin on his lapel like he'd earned something that made up for what he'd done. Isolde was dressed in navy blue, subtle, serious, controlled. She didn't turn around. Camber leaned close. "You okay?" "I'm not sure okay is in my vocabulary today," I said. She offered a slight nod, then turned her attention forward as the bailiff called everyone to rise. The judge entered, introduced the case, and we began. The prosecution laid out the charges first: unlawful entry, physical assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and endangerment of a federal officer, since I was technically still under military jurisdiction at the time of the attack. They presented timelines, statements, and then the video. The footage rolled on a screen to the left of the judge's bench. It was silent, colorless, a bit grainy, but every moment was clear. The knock. The door breaking, Dexter entering. Isolde behind him, me being shoved, grabbed, thrown. At the moment where Isolde said, "You should have signed," the courtroom stilled. No one breathed. When the video stopped, Camber stood. "Exhibit A, Your Honor. The rest is for context, but the truth is already there." Next came my turn to testify. I walked slowly to the stand, my side still stiff from the bruised ribs. The judge asked if I needed a cushion, and I said no. I wanted to feel the discomfort. I wanted to remember this moment fully. Camber's voice was calm but strong as she questioned me. "Captain Voss, can you describe your relationship with the defendants prior to the incident?" "Dexter is my brother-in-law. Isolde is my sister." "And what happened in the weeks leading up to the night of the assault?" "They asked me to co-sign a mortgage. I declined. Repeatedly. They escalated. There were threats, manipulation, and eventually, violence." "What was said to you at the moment of the assault?" I looked across the room. Isolde was staring at her lap. She said, "You should have signed." The silence in the room became heavier, like even the air was waiting for someone to deny it. But nobody did. Camber handed me the printed screenshots of their messages. "Were these sent to you by either defendant?" "Yes." "Do you believe they intended to intimidate you into signing against your will?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Camber nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney, a man named Brackett, stood. His suit was expensive, but his tone was cheap. "Captain Voss, is it true that your sister has always supported your military career? She's attended 2 events in 20 years. "I don't call that support," he smirked. "And you've had a complicated relationship with her, haven't you?" "No," I said. "She's had a complicated relationship with boundaries." A murmur passed through the room. Brackett turned to the judge. "We'd like to call Dexter Vaughn to the stand." Dexter approached like a man auditioning for sainthood. Slow steps, humble shoulders. He swore on the Bible, sat down, and launched into a speech about PTSD, stress, the weight of being a discharged Marine, and how emotions got the better of me. He even pulled out a framed certificate of service and placed it gently on the table before him. Camber leaned over to me. That medal he's wearing? It's not his. My jaw clenched. Can you prove it? She nodded, already texting someone. Give me 5 minutes. Sure enough, when cross-examined, Camber produced official military service records. No such award had ever been given to Dexter Vaughn. The judge narrowed his eyes. Mr. Vaughn, are you presenting falsified military honors in this courtroom? Dexter stumbled. I was told by a buddy. I didn't know. It was over. Right there. Everyone in the room could see the lie unraveling. No more speeches. No more sympathy. Then they called Isolde. She walked to the stand slowly. Her expression was neutral, but I saw her fingers trembling. Just slightly. She was sworn in, sat down, and bracket began. Miss Kavanaugh, were you aware of your husband's intention to confront your sister that night? She hesitated. He wanted to talk to her. That's all. And did you witness any violence? Long pause. Then, without looking at anyone, she whispered, Yes. Can you clarify? I saw him hit her. Twice. Maybe more. Did you intervene? Another pause. No. And did you, at any point, say the words, You should have signed? Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice stayed flat. Yes. It was quiet for so long afterward that I could hear the judge shifting in his chair. I didn't look at her. Not once. Not even when she stepped down, her shoulders curled like the weight of her lies had finally caught up. After both sides made closing statements, the judge called a recess for deliberation. Outside, in the hallway, Camber leaned against the wall beside me. Whatever happens, you did it. I nodded, the weight in my chest starting to lift, just slightly. An hour later, we were called back in. The judge read the verdict aloud. Guilty, on all counts. Dexter would serve time. Federal. Isolde, while spared prison due to her cooperation, was barred from contacting me indefinitely and would be civilly liable for damages. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just exhaled for the first time in weeks, because sometimes justice doesn't feel like victory, it just feels like finally being heard. The court delivered justice, but healing was mine to finish alone. The morning after the verdict, I sat in my car outside the courthouse long after the parking lot had emptied. The adrenaline was gone. My ribs still ached, though the bruises were fading. I kept replaying the last words the judge spoke, each one echoing like a slow drumbeat. Guilty on all counts. But that wasn't what lingered. What stuck with me was Isolde's voice when she finally broke on the stand. Not the tears, those didn't move me, but the moment her voice trembled as she admitted, We just wanted the land. That was it. Not a plea for forgiveness, not an apology, just a sentence that reduced everything, our childhood, our bond, my broken bones, into one shallow motive. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the park off Manor Road where Dad used to take us when we were little. The swing set had been replaced, the benches repainted, but the hill at the back was still there. I parked facing it and watched the wind move through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not the kind that builds into sobs, just a steady, quiet release that ran from my eyes without asking for attention. Later that afternoon, Camber called. They're preparing formal documentation, she said. Dexter will be transferred by week's end. Isolde's civil penalties are being calculated now. She'll be served by next month. Thanks, I replied, voice rough from the emotion I hadn't quite shaken. You sure you don't want to make a statement to the press? No, I said. Let the footage speak for itself. We hung up. I sat in the silence for a while longer before starting the engine and driving home. The apartment still smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon oil, left over from the base MP's sweep. They'd documented everything, cataloged every drop of blood, every broken frame, every word scribbled in the margins of the evidence I handed over. But what no one cataloged, what no report would reflect, was the silence. The silence of people who should have called, the silence of family members who hadn't reached out, the silence from my mother, who never once asked if I was okay. That was the loudest sound in my life now. The following week, I returned to base, not because I had to, because I needed to. Teaching young medics how to keep their heads in chaos reminded me of who I was before all this. It tethered me back to something steadier than trauma. In class, I didn't mention what happened. They knew, most of them had seen the internal notice, but they respected the boundary I set with a simple nod. I was grateful for that. One afternoon, I came home to find a letter in the mail, not from court, not from a lawyer, from Isolde. Typed. 1 page. I hope you're doing well. I've started therapy. I know that doesn't undo what happened. I don't expect anything from you. Just wanted to say, I'm trying to be better, for real this time. There was no return address, no signature at the bottom. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my binder, not under evidence, not under legal, just behind everything. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away. Some days passed. A few people who hadn't spoken to me during the trial reached out with half-hearted checking-in messages. I responded politely, but I didn't open that door again. Then came the email from Fort Sam Houston. They were holding a closed conference on domestic abuse within military families. One of the organizers, a former colleague, had submitted my name. They wanted me to speak. At first, I hesitated. Speaking publicly meant stepping out of the quiet I'd fought so hard to reclaim. But then I remembered that there were women like me still trying to survive in silence, and silence was what let it grow. The day of the event, I wore my uniform, the same one that had blood on it not long ago, now cleaned, pressed, restored. As I stood at the podium, lights dimmed and faces faded into shadow, I took a breath and began. I'm not here to retell the pain. I'm here to tell the truth that follows it. I walked them through my story, not the courtroom version, the real one, the manipulation that looked like love, the guilt that wore my sister's voice, the silence that nearly swallowed me, and then the sentence that anchored the entire room. Blood doesn't make you safe. History doesn't make you obligated. I let the words land. No explanation. No softening. When I stepped down, people didn't clap right away. They stood, quiet, respectful. A few were crying. One woman touched my arm as I passed, whispering, "You spoke for all of us." That night, I drove home without music, just the hum of tires and the thrum of rain against the windshield. When I got home, I made tea, opened the back door, and let the night air settle around me. I had survived war. I had survived family. But now I was surviving something harder, my own life, on my terms. The court had done its part. Now it was my turn to rebuild. The court delivered justice, but healing was mine to finish alone. That truth echoed through the quiet moments that came afterward, not the ones during the trial, but the strange, open days that followed. The kind where people didn't know whether to ask how you were doing or avoid the topic altogether. When the damage was already done and there were no more facts to present, only silence to live in. The headlines faded within weeks. What had once been whispers around base housing, side glances at the PX, or half sentences exchanged in break rooms simply disappeared. The court had ruled. Dexter was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, stripped of any remaining military recognition, his name quietly removed from veteran rosters. No ceremony, no protest, just a quiet erasure. Isolde vanished from family events. From what I heard through secondhand mentions, she and Dexter divorced quietly. No messy proceedings, just signatures, boxes, and a moving truck that pulled away before dawn. She left town, maybe the state. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to know. What I did need to know, what I worked to reclaim, was myself. Most mornings, I returned to the base. My classroom became the place I could breathe again. Training young medics gave me a sense of structure, of worth. They didn't know my story, not most of them, and I preferred it that way. Let them learn from the curriculum, not from my scars, but I changed how I taught. I added a few new sections, lessons about handling high-pressure situations not just on the battlefield, but at home. I started incorporating psychological response strategies, adding guest speakers from the behavioral health unit. One cadet asked if we were broadening the course to include life after the uniform. I told him without flinching, "We'd be failing you if we didn't." Camber and I met for lunch every couple of weeks, just like we used to before everything went sideways. One afternoon at a diner tucked between a laundromat and a church, she asked me, "Do you feel lighter now?" I stirred cream into my coffee, thought for a second. "Not lighter, just less tangled." She raised her cup. "To lines in ink." We clinked glasses. A few days later, I received an envelope in my mailbox, not the legal kind, but an official invitation. A military-sponsored conference was being held in San Antonio, Resilience Boundaries in Military Families. There was a note at the bottom. "We'd be honored to have you speak." I read it twice, set it down, walked away. Later that evening, I picked it up again and said yes. The auditorium was filled with uniforms and civilian clothes alike. Rows of polished shoes, notepads, faces trying not to show what they'd lived through. I stepped up to the microphone in full dress blues, not because I had to, but because I earned the right to stand there as myself. "I'm not here to recount pain for sympathy," I began. "I'm here because silence almost cost me everything." They listened, and I told them about the sister who watched, about the brother-in-law who hit, about the house that became a battlefield and the court that became a witness. But more than that, I talked about what no one teaches in boot camp. What to do when the harm comes from within the walls you're supposed to trust. I told them silence can feel like strength, until it breaks you. I ended with this. When someone uses your love as a leash, that isn't family, that's control. The room went still. Then, slowly, people began to rise. A standing ovation, not loud, not theatrical, just respectful, steady. Afterward, as I gathered my notes, a woman approached me, older than me, probably late 60s. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a navy cardigan with a gold pin that caught the light. She leaned in and said softly, "Your story sounded like mine. Thank you for not sugarcoating it." I looked her in the eye and said, "Thank you for surviving it." I drove home with the windows down. The spring air in Austin had finally turned warm without being heavy. On the way, I passed by a little flower shop I used to visit and pulled over, bought a small bundle of daisies, not for anyone else, just for my own table. Later that night, after dinner, I checked my inbox. Buried between confirmation emails and work updates, I found a message from Isolda. Just a few lines. "I hope you're doing well. I'm in therapy now. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know." I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. It stayed there, unread but not unseen. Some wounds don't need to be reopened, but they also don't need to be erased. On Sunday evening, I went for a walk, the kind where you don't measure distance, just time. The streets were quiet, the sun beginning its descent behind the rooftops. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel healed, but I felt steady. My body had mostly recovered. The bruises had faded, the hairline fracture in my cheek had mended, but the things that broke deeper, the trust, the memory, the illusion of safety and family, those were still under repair, and maybe always would be. I passed a small park, watched two sisters playing tag under the trees. One stumbled, and the other caught her hand before she fell. I smiled, not because it reminded me of anything I had, but because it reminded me of what was possible. When I got home, I made tea and opened the windows. The air carried no tension, no dread, just space. Justice gave me peace. But I gave myself freedom. Some wounds don't leave visible scars, but they change how we love, how we trust, and how we protect ourselves. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace or keeping yourself safe, you know exactly what this story feels like. So let me ask you, what would you do if the people who claim to love you crossed every line you drew? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, raw, real, and unforgettable, coming your way.